Welcome to the Christ Connection Podcast. We are here to help and encourage you to enjoy your adventure with Jesus. I'm your host, Kevin Senapati Ratna. Let the journey begin. Welcome to the show. This is Kevin Senapati Ratna, and I am excited for our guest today is Chris Maxwell. Chris, we're going to get into his bio in a second, or actually at the beginning of our conversation, but I did want to come in right at the front and encourage you with this. Maybe you're going through a hard time, maybe you're having some difficulty, life challenges of all shapes and sizes. I encourage you to soak in this conversation. Someone who's gone through and is going through life challenges, and he just got some great advice for you there. Or maybe you have a friend that's going through something, or pass this along to them. But also stay with it, because we're going to talk about the practice of how to deal with when you're the person caring. So this is just a great conversation, practical advice, but also the depth of what it means to walk with God in the difficulty. So I encourage you to enjoy the show. Sit back, relax. Without further ado, my conversation with Chris Maxwell. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Chris Maxwell, author of A Slow and Sudden God. I like his own intro in the back of the book. It's Chris Maxwell, his husband, father, and grandfather. He is writer, spiritual life director, international speaker, and a man who loves people. Chris hopes to be a voice of encouragement through words spoken, words written, and a life lived. Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be a part of this with you.
Just for the audience to know, we met through Lee Grady, who was episode number 1 on the show here. So at that original Bold Venture way back in the, I suppose it's been probably 7-8 years ago now. And I still remember you spoke there and shared a little bit of your story then, and it's stuck with me. So why don't you, maybe a great place to start would be for you to give a little bit of your story and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Well, thanks again for the opportunity. And we'll just dive in to the story. I pastored a church in Orlando, Florida for 19 years. Before that, I was a youth pastor. And during those years of pastoring in Orlando, just fell in love even more with God and with people. My wife, Debbie, and I had 3 sons. And as those young men were growing up, and I was pastoring this wonderful congregation, loved my time with Lee. Lee Grady and I became very good friends. We would meet at least once a month for a time of breakfast and then a prayer walk together, and spent many times just seeking the Lord and having honest conversations and dialogue, and loved those times. I was very healthy. I was doing a lot of writing. I was writing Sunday school curriculum. Again, my wife and I were watching our 3 sons grow up. I was coaching basketball and baseball, and I'm very healthy. I'd never been sick. And then our big life change experience happened in March of 1996 when I became very ill. I was sent to the hospital, high fever, very sick. They did not know what was going on with me, and they did not know if I would live. I was suffering from encephalitis, an infection that my immune system did not fight off. And there I was, this healthy Chris, young, vibrant, trying to do a lot of things for the building of God's kingdom. And all of a sudden there I was dying unexpectedly. And so that was a major life-changing experience for us. As you can tell, as your audience can tell, I did live. But as I was slowly recovering from the illness, we did not know what the long-term effects would be. I have now severe brain damage in my left temporal lobe. I live with epilepsy and have a variety of life struggles and issues that I battle with. But it's interesting to know that even in those dark, painful moments, you can be just so close to God in those times. And you know, we're talking a lot today about um, about me being a writer. And as I was there in the hospital, barely surviving, then slowly recovering, I was journaling while I was in the hospital. It was like psalmistic, prayerful therapy, like David's honest prayers in our Psalms. I was crying out prayers of desperation to God. Um, and those times, my writing was therapeutic for me. And since that time, I am still living, as I mentioned, I'm living with epilepsy and brain damage, but it's a miracle. My neurologist, I saw him recently when my ninth book was released. We met for dinner, and here he is holding the book, and he's saying again, Chris, your stubbornness and your God, those are the two reasons you're able to do this. So God gets the glory, but I had to be stubborn and work. And writing is one of the ways that I've worked through this. But prayer, wonderful people, living in community where church is not just a building and a service, but it's community where people are there to love you through pain, to pray with you through pain, to endure pain with you, and to be there with me and my wife and our sons and our family. Very grateful. So that's a summary of that story. Now I work as campus pastor and director of spiritual life at Emmanuel College, and writing my own books and helping other people write their books. And I travel around and speak in a variety of places, and in churches, and also in the general market, speaking at disability groups and hospitals and in various places like that.
Have you? I mean, what's kind of the long term? Is it something that gets better over time, or is it kind of stays the same, or how does that work for you as far as health goes?
Yeah, good question. Someone asked me recently, how long did it take you to finally be better from the illness? And I said, I don't know. I'll let you know when when that time comes. And so I add a little humor to it, but honestly, this is a permanent issue, and I had to come to terms with that. And that's difficult for many people in our church world who believe in faith. We believe in praying. We believe God can work miracles. And maybe, though, the miracle for me is believing that a brain can be as severely damaged as mine is, but I can be seizure free now and able to do things for the kingdom in speaking to people that I would not be able to speak to otherwise. There are some people that believe, well, if you had more faith, you wouldn't even be taking medicine and things like that. Well, I don't believe that's the case. There are a lot of things that we do that are now available to us, and we should be thankful for that. But it's still a miracle that I'm able to do what I'm able to do, and I give God the credit for that, and the many people that have loved me and stayed with me through these storms of life. So not fully recovered, but adjusted, I think, is a good way to put it. I've adjusted to this new me, this new life, a life where I have to ask for help, where I am a healthy dependence upon a community and people who can speak into my life. And that really is a good thing. We all should be living there by choice, not by force, but we should be living in community. And I like to think of it as living in the plural instead of the singular. Before I had the illness, I could do a lot of things on my own that I cannot do now, and that's not always healthy. Too many people, in my opinion, are living in the singular. They're living in isolation, and they need to move from that into life in the kingdom, life in community, moving from the singular to the plural. So yeah, long answer to your question, but not completely healthy the way I was pre-illness, but much better than they ever thought I would be, and finding that godliness and contentment in the middle of this situation.
Hey, well, I figured at some point we'd get to this. Having heard you speak and all that, is moving from that singular to the plural. Was that part of your life beforehand? Because you talked about meeting with Lee and things like that. Has that always been part of your passion, or has this illness really pushed you into that world and that idea?
Yeah, it has been a part of my life. I've loved friendships and close relationships, but it's taken it to another level. Whereas before, I just assumed that I could do so many things on my own, and now I know that I can't. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. We don't have to have this, so many positive books and themes and seminars on leadership today, and I love that. But we have to be careful that we are leading correctly and not in a controlling way. And the illness has helped me learn to lead at times with people not always behind me but people right beside me. Let's walk this together, because I need the care and the love of other people who can speak into my life. I mean, sometimes with my schedule, I mean, you and I know that it was difficult to find a time for this. My schedule's crazy, and and everything that's going on with my job at Emmanuel, and then my writing and speaking schedules. But I have people in my life who can look at me and say, Chris, all right, this is a little too much right now. You need to take a break. This is going to get to you. And that's one of the things I have to watch out for with my brain damage. Because of the scar tissue, my brain has to do extra work in a certain amount of time to find a word, to find that noun or that verb that I'm writing or that I'm saying. And it's so much extra mental duty that the electrical system of the brain, that's what can trigger seizures. And so I have to have people speaking to my life when it's time to rest, to wait, to hit pause, and to slow down in this busy pace of life. So yeah, it's something that I liked before, but now I need that desperately, and I believe we all do. I mean, think of each person that's listening to this, who is beside them in this journey, in this adventure we call life. Who is asking them the hard questions? And that's the question we all need to be thinking about.
When you and Lee have, I mean, in his conversation and hearing you speak, and you've had this honest conversation for a long time. And I remember at one of the Bold Ventures, you said something about confession is the something, I didn't get the exact wording, but the medicine we need and most often avoid, or something along that line.
Yes.
Is how do people move? And Lee and I actually talked about this a little bit on that episode. But how do people move into a place of confession at a deeper level? Do you have any advice for people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there are many people who have been hurt when they have tried to be honest and transparent and authentic with others, and they spoke about their pain and their battles, and people did not hold that confidential. They exposed that, or they mistreated them. They treated them differently after being told of that. So I understand that there's the potential for harm, and especially if we've been hurt in the past. But my suggestion is, hey, let's not be controlled by pains from the past. Let's not let the fact that other people have abused or mistreated us to cause us to live in the singular. Let's still choose to live in the plural. Let's be around others, and let's have that right person or those few people that we can spend time with face to face and have honest conversations, knowing that this is someone I can trust. They've proven that to me. They have weaknesses. I have weaknesses. Let's just meet in the middle and be there for one another. And that's the story that Lee and I would experience together. He knew that, to me, he was not he was not just this Lee Grady who's famous, that so many people saw him that way. He needed to just be Lee. He was desperate for that, and he wanted those types of conversation and that type of dialogue with me, and I was able to give that to him because I love him, the person, not him, the status, not him, his job title. He was just the person. And so I'm thinking of people who are listening to this, and they are afraid of being betrayed. They're afraid of being hurt. Find the right person and the right people. In my life, I've had several groups, like we've talked about with Lee and my conversations with him. Right now, I have a dear friend that I work with at the college, and we meet once a week. We know it's going to be honest. It's going to be transparent. But then I also have a group of people that I meet with, and this is like an accountability group, and we can open up and talk and be transparent. And we can have those moments where it's all just laughter and fun, other moments where it's just deep prayers for one another. And then going back to that one word that you use, sometimes maybe there's one of us in this group, it needs to be a moment of confession. And unfortunately, in the Protestant world, we have forgotten the beauty of confession. Because we all say, I go directly to God. And yes, we do. What an honor it is to be able to pray directly to God. We do not have to go through another person to get to him. But we often fail to experience the beauty of of receiving help from another person who can guide us to God the right way. And as we release some of the pain, those painful parts of our life narrative, those painful parts that we need to talk about and release, until we release some of those things, we might not be able to receive that the Lord has for us. And having someone around who is our friend, who is our a type of spiritual priest, those ears who will listen to us, a heart that will still love us. I'm praying that we can all become better at having people like that in our lives.
Going back a little bit in your story, when you talk about you were in the hospital and began to write kind of your journals and things like that, you mentioned you were creating material, but was that really the starting of your kind of writing of books, or had you already written some books before? I guess I don't know the timeline on that. Was that the season that started the books, or was it before then?
Well, I had been writing a lot of curriculum and a lot of articles before the illness. I had not had a book published before then. I had put together some proposals and was working with agents and doing book proposals, and all that was kind of put on hold after the illness, because after that, I had to learn to read and write again.
Wow.
That was a very difficult season. But in the book that you've been reading, The Slow and Sudden God, 40 Years of Wonder, it's a collection of poems that are over a 4-decade journey of my life. And many of them were written when I was in college, and some were written when I was a youth pastor, and then during my years of pastoring, during my years of battling the illness afterwards, and some were written right before the book came out last year. And so it's many of these seasons of life. But my writing, I've always loved poetry. It's not what some people like, but I love it. So much of the Bible is full of poetry, and I love that. It's how my brain works. But especially now, post-illness, it's one of my editors said, Chris the scholar became Chris the poet. And even though I liked poetry previously, most of my books that are prose, actually the first drafts are more poetic and rhythmic and flow and journaling, and we have to take some of that out. But my personal prayer journal entries and my conversations with God is a very free verse, poetic flow. I call it psalmistic therapy, like reading the Psalms. That's why I love the Psalms so much, because the honesty, the transparency, but also the rhythm, the flow, the sequence. It's therapeutic for me.
Well, since we mentioned confession, I'll confess something. I've not read a lot of poetry in my life. That's never been, but I really did like your book. I've read a couple books of poetry in the last couple decades, and so but this is and maybe it's knowing you, having heard you, but I love the depth that you bring, and the choice of words. What you kind of reference it, but is poetry natural for you to write? Is that kind of just how you think, or is it a skill that you've just fine-tuned? Does that make sense as far as?
Yes, and I think it's all of that. Again, loved poetry. I was writing poetry when I was young. I work at the college now that I attended when I was a college student, and one of the English professors would always read and evaluate my poetry, and she encouraged that. But but after that, most of my writing was prose and curriculum and things that had to be very scholarly and academic. But deep inside, I loved the flow of poetry, and then now it is much better for the direction that my brain works, because when you think of this illustration, think of it this way: like if you're accustomed to driving in one direction and using one interstate, and then that road is damaged for some reason, or they're having to do some construction, you have to take a different route. Uh, that's the illustration I often use with my brain damage, because normally, as you think of a phrase or a word, my left temporal lobe, when it was healthy, I could just go straight down that mental street and find the word. But my brain is not just temporarily under construction. That road is permanently damaged. And so I have to take a different route. And poetry often does that also. Instead of just this quick, let's get to the point, it misses the beauty of words. It misses the beauty of the wonder of the thought process of finding ourselves there. And instead of just a quick high five and hello, it's a let's sit at the table together. Let's take the longer route and notice there's beauty off course. Yes, we're going to get back to the place we intend to go, and that's important. But we need to remember that there's beauty on this side and on that side, and there's air and there's wind, and there are leaves falling from the trees, and those beautiful moments of life. And again, that's why I love the Psalms so much, because I mean, David and the other psalmists are blunt, they're raw, but it also has rhythm and sequence and flow. And again, I love that. And so, yes, pre-illness, I did love poetry, but now I'm actually dependent upon it, because that is how the damaged brain of mine works. And isn't that great, though, that it doesn't have to be bad news? It can be beautiful news, that even with part of this interstate, my brain damaged, God has a beautiful route for me to take, and He's with me. He's with me in those curves and turns and hills and those sharp roads. And there's beauty there also, and I want to find those in words that can also remind us that our lives have scars, that our lives have damaged. Maybe not the same as my left temporal lobe, but maybe the relationships of those that were listening to us, maybe the ministry of someone who's listening to us. There's scar there, there's damage there, but let's don't give up. We can take a poetic route and find beauty in the moment. And speaking of poetry, I'm since the book Slow and Sudden God came out, I've been talking a lot about, in places I'm speaking, I'm talking about poetry in a variety of ways. I'm talking about the history of poetry. I'm talking about the therapy of poetry, how the poetic journaling is therapeutic for us. I'm talking about neuroplasticity, a new way of kind of energizing and rewiring the brain to get it to think better. And poetry can do that, just like for you. Hey, I'm proud of you, by the way. You read that. You read this. It's not your normal preference of reading. But it actually rewires the brain and helps you to think differently. And in the brain, this thing that God has created that is so beautiful and capable and wonderful, we limit it. We lock it into the corner because this is the only way to do things. Well, sometimes let's kick the walls and find poetry in this world of prose. Let's find beauty there. So neuroplasticity, but then I also emphasize poetry in the Bible. I mean, many scholars will tell you 1/3 of Scripture is poetic in form. Others, like Eugene Peterson, who recently passed away, his argument was 1/2 is some type of poetry in the Bible. And I can tell he's biased like me. He loves poetry in Scripture. But you think about so many books of the Bible that are poetic in form, and we don't think about it that way. But if we don't understand, as we're studying a biblical passage and we do not understand the context as being in this style, we could have a tendency to misinterpret what God is saying through the text. And we need to understand this is not just prose here. This is not just a story being told or a command being given. It's a poetic prayer being prayed. It helps us gain a better understanding of the original text when we grasp the language that was used there.
When you talk about therapeutic poetry, do you? Because I can see that would benefit anybody, even in their own devotional time, if they're maybe they're. I mean, just for purposes of encountering God. You may never publish it, but do you have any recommendations for people who wanted to, engage with Scripture and then bring it into their own, journaling? Do you have any recommendation
Yes.
about how to do that?
That is a wonderful question, and one of the things that I do when because I teach spiritual formation, just teaching the spiritual disciplines of prayer and Christian meditation and silence and reverence to God and worship and all these elements of conversation with God. And as I'm teaching that in churches or in schools, various places, one of the assignments I give is, all right, let's take the most popular Psalm, Psalm 23. And the Lord is what is he in the Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd. Well, I have them rewrite that. I have those in the audience just take time to journal their own poetic prayer and to write it in a language that is relevant to their personal situation. Just like David could definitely relate to what it meant to be a shepherd. He knew that very well. He knew the taste, the smell, the aroma, the climate, the atmosphere. He could write about it in a poetic, prayerful form. But I mean, I've never been a shepherd. I've been a pastor and a shepherd that way, but with live animals, no. And so what about you? I've talked to a group of coaches. The Lord to them was their coach. And they were able to use phrases and language emphasizing the same points of the psalm, but in a way that was relevant to their situation. And it inspired them. It helped them. In a lot of my counseling and in times as I'm doing pastoral care with clients or people, I'll have them do the same thing. Rewrite this psalm in your own language. And often they will write about, the Lord is my Father, and he will not abuse me.
Wow.
Because that's changing our perspective of Father God. Instead of him being like our earthly father who may have abused us or abandoned us, now we can call God Father, and he is the one who is coming to pursue us, to heal us, and to hold us, and to love us. And that is so therapeutic to again, realize what's there, release it, in prayerful journaling, poetic form, release it, and then receive the grace in those moments.
Okay. And sticking on the poetry for just because again, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm willing to grow. Again, I don't have anything against poetry. I just have not encountered or haven't read a lot. Other than obviously yours, which having read the book I recommended, but. Do you have any advice for someone who's wanting to read poetry as a new thing for them, kind of a direction, maybe an author that you recommend, or just a idea of how to think about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love. In fact, one of the people who wrote a review about my book, A Slow and Sudden God, talked about how my poetry was similar to Mary Oliver. I took that as an honor because I love her poetry. So that would be someone I would suggest reading. Mary Oliver, read her work. Lucy Shaw, I've loved her work. She's very gifted, great poet. I mentioned Eugene Peterson. I mentioned him a lot. It's interesting to me how not only is he is such a best-selling author, so many books he's written, but even his prose, even his academic prose has poetic flow and rhythm to it. So read Eugene Peterson, he's good. Wendell Perry. I tell you, there are two of my favorite writers, and I don't know how many in your audience has read them. They've written some poetry, but to me, even their prose has poetic flow to it, and that's Kathleen Norris and Annie Dillard. Both of those ladies would be people I would suggest. You can find some of their poetry, but go and read some of their other books, and it has this poetic flow to their prose, and I love that. I love how they have written and what they have written, and also spend time in Scripture. reading the Psalms. I mean, think of Psalms, Proverbs. Uh, think of the major and minor prophets of Scripture, and realize that there's so many places like that in the Bible that are poetic. So read there and stay there, and don't read so fast. Slow the pace a little bit when you read. And that's one of the things I've tried to encourage people to do with the books that are in my Pause series. We're all in such a hurry. Let's hit pause, slow down, and poetry is one of the ways we can do that as we read the poetry of others and as we learn to write some of that ourselves.
Is that part of the nature of poetry? It has to be read at a slower pace maybe than the average prose, where because you're carrying words that, I mean, it's kind of like each line has a different weight than when you're writing different type of. Does that make sense?
Yes, and when I do readings from my different books, it's helpful to do that in prose also. But poetry, it's so intentional because you speed up and you're going so fast, and then you intentionally just slow the pace, like in that traffic jam for a moment. And then you turn right and you go off course and you see this beauty, as I was saying earlier, you see this beauty. So slow the pace and notice the sun rising. And then realize that you have to get where you're going, and so you speed up again for emphasis or for point, and then you take yourself there. And see how that's conversational. Think back of all the stories many of us grew up being told, and there's a poetic flow to good storytelling. And the pace can change, and the emphasis can change, and the mood. It's all a part of it. There's a variety of types of poetry that people can read about and study about. But yeah, just begin there, realizing that there's poetry right beside us in Scripture. There are good poets to read, and as you're reading poetry, think about how it fits. I mean, so many people have responded to me, and a lot of people like you. They've only read the book A Slow and Sudden God, not because they like poetry or they've read poetry before, but because they know me, they've liked my other books, and they wanted to read this. And to them, it's sort of a new adventure. One of my friends has since then, he kept saying, Chris, I'm just going to buy the book because you're my friend. I'm not going to read it. I don't like poetry. And so I was giving him all my argument about how that's going to be so good for your brain. Well, he's an artist. He's a very gifted artist. I said, it's actually going to be using the same part of your brain now. And now I'm getting text messages for him that are poems that he's writing. And it's like this new ability to communicate and pray to God like he never has before. So it's a fresh conversation. Instead of talking to God the same way we always have, it's adding a variety in the dialogue. It's like going out to eat with the person that you're closest to in life at a restaurant you've never eaten before, and enjoying those moments.
Well, I love that. That's poetry there, isn't it? Yeah. You've referenced this kind of as a couple times, but one of my favorite lines from your book was, "These highways under construction required me to gallop down roads I never prepared for," and that seems to be part of your story. You've gone down a road that you weren't prepared for, but all sorts of people are going to end up going down roads that they weren't prepared for. That seems to be the nature of life. Any advice, though, for someone who all of a sudden finds them down? They hit that construction zone, and they're in a different, almost in a different time zone than they thought they were going to be, and they're looking back. Any advice for them on that journey?
I wish it could be an easy, well, just do this and all will be well. Or, as we've often heard, well, if you just have enough faith, or if you live right. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's think of the biblical characters and our church leaders throughout church history, and who sought the life of closeness to God, but they also struggled, and there were limps and battles along the way. I think, use the illustration about the construction in the road, but let's use a different illustration here, and it's the title of the book that I wrote about my illness. It's called Underwater. And there are times that people feel underwater for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's the job. or the job they wish they had, they did have, but they no longer have. Maybe it's their financial struggle that they're battling right now. Maybe it's a relationship. They thought that this relationship was going to be wonderful, and now it's just full of tension and stress. They feel underwater. Right now, they feel underwater. Well, I wrote about it because as someone living with brain damage in a world that you're looked down upon, if you struggle in that way, you feel underwater. I mean, I never know, am I going to come ashore? Am I going to find a word? Am I going to be able to catch that noun or that verb, that phrase, that name? I feel underwater living life with epilepsy. Well, other people feel underwater and they feel trapped for a variety of reasons. My suggestion is, let's face our present situation, not live in denial of our situation and call it faith. Let's see it as it is. Let's notice the pain. Let's face the situation. But then let's realize that we do not have to face that situation alone. We believe in a God who is with us in the water, God who is with us in the storms. Man, I love it. Sometimes he does calm the storms. It's wonderful when he calms the storm. But often we will live this life where there's a hurricane all around us. But let him take us to this place where we're in the eye of the hurricane, but there's peace there. He is our peace, not our external circumstances. Let's not allow them to be that rob us of peace, or that we will be dependent upon to provide peace. Let him be our Prince of Peace. Let him be that one who keeps us in that place, right in the eye of the hurricane that we can't control. But let's be controlled and held by him and find peace in the moments, embracing him, being held by him. And that includes, as we were talking earlier, God, Father, Son, Spirit, yes, the Trinity, but also the community of believers, people who can be there in our lives to meet us in that place of pain. So, yes, be aware of the situation. Don't live in denial of it, but see more than the human eyes can see, and that is knowing God with us there. The Spirit of the Lord is with us in those moments, and pursue the right help. I mean, I have so many suggestions that I could give to people, but sometimes the solution to someone, it may not solve their external problem, but it will help someone be able to endure the storm better. That is to get enough sleep. We live in this hurried world, and we think we need a revival service to bring us something. Actually, God already has designed what we need. We may need a little Sabbath rest.
Yeah.
So turn off the TV, turn off the phone, turn off the computer. Not right now, after our show is over, right? After this conversation ends. But yeah, you can turn it off and not be dependent upon anything in this high-tech world, but be held by the high touch of God and rest in him. See a doctor, see a physician who can check and see if there's other things happening. See the right type of counselor, the right type of life coach or mentor to be there in your life. And then, to me, again, journaling, reading scripture, playing music that helps us to reflect and find beauty. It's so many things. I could continue talking forever, but again, for me, writing, reading, even when it was hard for me and I had to learn to read and write again, if I had not been stubborn enough, the right way, not the wrong way, but the right way, stubborn enough to depend on God and work in the middle of that pain, boy, I don't know what would have happened to me, but I believe that those who are listening to you, as they're thinking about their own situation, please seek help from the right people and let God be our help in time of need.
Yeah,
I love it. The biblical poet, the psalmist, God is our refuge, our help in time of need. Therefore, I will not fear. Though the earth gives way, the waters roar and foam, the mountains quake with surging, there is a river whose streams will make us glad. See, the poetic prayer was not living in denial of the storms. It was not that we didn't see the storms. We see more than that. No, not denial, but more than what these human eyes can see. We're going to see the hands of the Father in the storm, and he can calm it, or he can help us endure our adventure underwater. I don't know, some people may be directed by God to come ashore. Others may stay in the waves of that rapid current of the unknown, but He is our peace in the middle of that.
That is amazing advice. There's that it could take someone a while to just unpack all of that's such good stuff that's in there. You just highlight two pieces there, just because it's. The spirituality of a nap. There's some, I like to say, sometimes sleep and live to see another day can be the difference between making it and giving up in the midst of a storm. And the other thing you talked about was finding those people, and sometimes it's professionals like counselors and doctors and things like that. And we've already highlighted the friendship factor to make it through the storm, which brings me to a question I wanted to ask, because one of my favorites from your book was talking about the difference between care and being carried. The danger of care isn't to be carried, and you're trying. At least my take, and I guess poetry, maybe it can go multiple ways, but you're trying to encourage people to not help other people, but not take it on themselves in a way that's unhealthy. Do you have any advice for someone who's maybe their friend is underwater and they want to be a help, they want to be a strength, they're concerned their friend's gonna sink or whatever, to be that support but not let it drown them as well?
Yeah. Boy, that's such an important topic. It's often not discussed, in my opinion, enough in our culture. But we need to care for people. We need to be here to care for others. But that doesn't mean that we carry all of their pain and their struggle into our lives. Many people have had to come for help not because of their own problems, but because they never learned how to release the pain of others and release it to the Lord. And I've got to be honest with you. I mean, I believe in authenticity and transparency. That has been a weakness in my life. There have been times in the past, especially when I would carry that weight. And writing this poem was therapeutic for me. It was a reminder to me personally, not just to another audience, but for me personally, to care for the people, but not carry their problems with me everywhere I go. It's not going to make them better. It's not going to make me better. And what it does, it's trying to assume that I can do what only God can do. I am there to listen, to love, and to care. But it doesn't need to move to a place of codependence where I am depending on them, depending on me. That is dangerous. And the stress level, the pressure that's upon pastors and people today, and I'm helping so many patients and people in the epilepsy world, the weight that's on the caregivers. Usually when I'm invited to speak, they want to hear my story. What about Debbie's side of the story? What about our sons, Taylor, Aaron, and Graham? What about their side of the story? They were my caregivers through the adventure, the staff. And so you have to find a balance of caring for the person, but don't continue carrying the weight. That we are here to help them release it, but we're not to catch it and carry it ourselves. That doesn't solve their problem. It creates more problems for all of us. So how do you do that? You have to kind of keep an eye on yourself and how are you dealing with it. I have a system in place that before I go to bed at night, I use a device and I just go through and read and journal, and I make sure that, again, I'm releasing any of the struggles from that day. I'm releasing it, praying it. Sometimes praying out loud is doing that. Sometimes it's writing a new journal, writing a poem or a prayer to the Lord and releasing the pain from that day. Sometimes it's taking an ancient prayer that was written so many years ago and thinking of what that person was going through as they wrote that, and then repeating it, making it personal for you, and then releasing the pain from the past or the present so it is not controlling our future. And it has to be intentional. And then again, having people close enough to our lives that can tell us, okay, Chris, I know you've been helping these people as they're going through this. I don't know the whole story, but I know you're spending a lot of time with them. What is this doing to you? So we need people in our lives asking us those types of questions.
So just to dig a little deeper on that, so at the end of the day, you kind of walk through your day in your mind and then kind of say, okay, what do I need to release? Or how does that, is there a kind of you said there's a system to it. So what does that look like maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think the way you said it is what I'm doing. I'll look back through my schedule for the day, and okay, is any of that I'm still carrying with me? If so, am I carrying it emotionally? Is it affecting me? Okay, if it is, what do I need to do about it? How do I need to release that? Why am I thinking that I can do what only God can do? I am not as big as I think I am here. I'm this little tiny part of the story. God is the big character in the drama. Okay, I am not. I'm just one little tiny piece. I'm an important piece. We have to realize that. But we are not so big that we are to solve every problem ourselves. And that is, so we realize what's there, and then we release that. Just we have to have that recognition and then release it in prayer to the Lord. And then we take deep breaths. We breathe too quickly. We have shallow breath. So we need to inhale and exhale slowly. Let's breathe deeply and focus on the goodness of the Lord. Think about Him being our source of peace, Him being our hope, and then we can close our eyes and boom, we're falling asleep, and it's just this peaceful time instead of that stress of, oh no, look at what all I have to carry. No, you don't have to carry. Care, but don't carry the weight yourself. We don't have enough muscle to do that ourselves. He does, we do not. Let's not attempt to.
Well, we are getting closer near the end of this, and so you being a spiritual formation teacher that you do and teach on, I can't not ask this question. As you're looking in the last maybe 3 to 5 years of your own spiritual journey, is there any spiritual habits or practices that you've added to your, or maybe subtracted from your life that has been beneficial to you that come to mind?
Yes. Yeah, I think the big word there is pause. That was one of the books that I wrote is called Pause, The Secret to a Better Life, One Word at a Time. And that eventually became a series. The second book in that was for moms who were out there so busy taking care of everybody but themselves. And so that book is called Pause for Moms, Finding Rest in a Too Busy World. And the third book in the series is Pause for Pastors, Finding Still Waters in the Storm of Ministry. We had some denominations and some groups, and we have had some churches also require all their staff members to read that. And some groups are requiring all those who are going into ministry to read Pause for Pastors. And the fourth book in that series was Pause with Jesus, encountering His story in everyday life. And so often we don't think of just hit pause as just kind of be led beside the still waters, those calming moments in life, that deep breath. To me, that's a spiritual discipline we really don't have enough time for in our hurried world. We're going at such a rapid pace, but pause is one that we often leave out. And here's one, the spiritual discipline of silence. We feel like we have to always have the noise. We have to always have the volume and the sound. What about the beauty of silence? Here's one that most in your audience may not have heard, and I love when I'm speaking at groups and teaching churches how to apply this, the spiritual discipline of nothingness. Why do we have to do something for God? Why not just the being with Him instead of the doing something? Right now, let's don't sing a song, let's don't quote a verse, let's don't study deeply, let's just do nothing. Isn't that a wonderful relationship when you can be so in love with someone that you can just be together? You can just be together. So those are a few. I could talk so long and talk about so many different spiritual disciplines, but to me those are crucial and very important especially in our hurried world.
Well, just to follow up on the nothingness for a second, what your examples were in a church setting, maybe going on a verse or whatever, but maybe on a personal level of what the discipline of nothingness might look like.
Yeah, it's very good. Sometimes, again, because I have my days so strictly scheduled with all of my appointments and everything going on, I have to schedule nothingness there, or I'm less likely to do it. But there are times when I'm driving from where I live, and I'm about a 2-hour drive to the Atlanta airport if I'm traveling, and I want to be talking on the phone or always have music and praying specific things, and all those are good, and I will be doing those. But there are times when I need to leave the music off and leave the phone off and enjoy the silence, and that plays out in other ways. Just don't plan. Just step outside, not with a plan, not with an agenda. Let there be nothing planned, but just go and be with God in the moment. Maybe you didn't even know that you would be able to see the sunset. Well, that nothingness is something that is so healthy of a reminder that God is bigger. We are tiny. He is good. He's full of grace. We are loved, and we are His. And that is so important.
Yes.
And there are times though that I put it on my schedule for a particular day. Nothing in this time. Don't do anything. Just breathe and relax.
Wow.
And sometimes we feel guilty for that.
Right. No, yeah. We live in a world where if you say, how are you doing? And your answer is not, I'm busy. That's almost feels like you're not a complete person. And so to have nothingness in there is a stretch. I think this is probably a good place to start landing the plane. Do you... Well, I obviously want to encourage everyone to check out your books, Chris Maxwell. I'm guessing wherever books are sold. Your website's chrismaxwell.me. But any final ask or encouragement that you'd want to, or place you want to send people elsewhere that to grow in their faith, and just like to leave this kind of open-ended for you, where you'd like to, what you'd like to challenge the audience with.
Yeah, I think finding a book in the Pause series would be good for each person, depending on where they are, what their story is, or buy several copies from the Pause series and give Pause for Moms away as gifts to mothers who need time to rest, time to think, and time to reflect. Think of those who are in the ministry, or those who are pursuing ministry, or missionaries who are always so busy. Get them a copy of Pause for Pastors. And all of us need to be reading Pause with Jesus, just going through, it goes through the gospel narratives and imagines what if we were there in the story. And it's a Bible study type, but not deep theology, but finding God in the moment. And also, there's been so many people who are not followers of Christ that have read Underwater. And if any of you know those who are coming back from war with traumatic brain injury, who have faced some type of life-changing experience, Underwater would be a good place. But for each of us, whatever our story, whether you buy the books and give the books away or not, I want you to realize that it's okay when God seems slow. Like the title of the book, A Slow and Sudden God. He seems slow. Your prayers may not be being answered. Continue the dialogue with God. Continue the moments with Him, because maybe it's slow now, but something's going to happen very quickly, and it's going to be beautiful and big and large and healing. And do not give up. We're not in the sprint. We're in the marathon. And we don't have to be in the marathon alone. We have others running beside us in this great adventure, those who are waiting on us and cheering for us. And we're empowered by the presence of God. He's not grading and ranking how well we perform. He is empowering us so that He can help us endure the journey as we bring a smile or listening ears or a heart of care to someone who needs us. And we are the ones that have been sent by God to be beside those people. Let's not live life alone. Let's enjoy the journey, not just pursuing our destination. Let's enjoy the journey. Take deep breaths and appreciate every moment with the Father.
Wow. Thank you, Chris. This has been so rich. You've added so much. And so I just want to thank you for being on the show today. And again, everyone go check out all of his books and maybe even try some poetry. So, thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Chris Maxwell as much as I did. I think it was just so practical and had such great advice if you're going through the challenges of life, but also just some encouragement for our soul. We all need that from time to time. If you know someone who's going through a tough time right now, why don't you pass along this to them that they could be encouraged as well. Maybe your social media. We love to be a blessing to as many people as possible. If you're looking for the show notes, come on over to christconnection.cc/podcast. You get a list of all those poetry people that he mentioned, and along with other how to find his books and things like that. Again, that's christconnection.cc/podcast. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're on social media, we're at Christ Connection for Facebook, and Enjoying Prayer on Twitter. Stop by and say hi, maybe where you're listening to this from. We're just trying to be a blessing, and so why don't you check us out again, christconnection.cc/podcast. We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks for listening.